Alright, let's talk about Asia. When we think of Asia, we might picture bustling megacities, technological innovation, maybe even some really good street food. But behind this facade of progress, a storm is brewing. We're talking about a perfect storm of economic instability, political turmoil, and social unrest that threatens to engulf several nations. This isn't some far-off dystopian future, it's happening right now. From the debt-ridden streets of Colombo to the conflict-ridden landscapes of Kabul, the signs are impossible to ignore. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about millions of lives hanging in the balance. Experts have been sounding the alarm bells for years, but it seems like nobody's really been paying attention. Well, we're here to change that. Over the next few minutes, we're going to shine a light on 10 countries in Asia teetering on the precipice of collapse. Buckle up, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. And don't forget to subscribe to the GlobeBit YouTube channel for more in-depth analysis and updates.
Our first stop, sadly, is a place that was once synonymous with idyllic beaches and lush tea plantations, Sri Lanka. But those tourism brochures don't quite capture the reality on the ground anymore. Instead of paradise, we find a nation grappling with an economic crisis of epic proportions. Think about this. Sri Lanka actually defaulted on its debt last year. That's right, they basically looked at their creditors and said, yeah, about that loan, we're gonna have to pass. Not exactly a recipe for economic stability, is it? And as you can imagine, the consequences have been disastrous. Inflation is so out of control that basic necessities like food and fuel are out of reach for many Sri Lankans. Imagine having to choose between feeding your family and fueling your tuk-tuk. It's a lose-lose situation. This has led to widespread social unrest, with people taking to the streets to demand action from a government that seems increasingly incapable of providing solutions. The human cost of this crisis is very real, and it's a stark reminder of just how quickly things can unravel.
Next, we travel north to Pakistan, a country grappling with its own unique set of challenges. Now, Pakistan has a long and complicated history, but let's focus on the here and now. The current situation is, to put it mildly, precarious. Imagine a country where political instability, economic uncertainty, and security threats are as commonplace as a decent cup of chai. That's Pakistan in a nutshell. The country is drowning in debt, with a staggering external debt burden that seems to grow larger by the day. Inflation is soaring, making everyday life a struggle for ordinary Pakistanis. Pakistan is also facing a growing terrorist threat, with extremist groups operating with disturbing impunity in certain regions.
Our next stop takes us to Myanmar, a nation that has been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons in recent years. Remember the military coup in 2021? Things haven't exactly improved since then. In fact, they've gotten significantly worse. Imagine a country where the military has seized control, crushing dissent with brutal force. That's the reality in Myanmar today. Basic freedoms have been suppressed, and the economy is in free fall. The coup plunged Myanmar into chaos, and the junta's grip on power has only tightened. The economy has been crippled, with businesses shutting down and foreign investment drying up faster than a puddle in the midday sun. Millions of people have been plunged into poverty, and the United Nations has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe.
Now let's talk about North Korea, shall we? The so-called Hermit Kingdom has always been something of an enigma, shrouded in secrecy and ruled with an iron fist by the Kim dynasty. But even by North Korean standards, things are tough right now. The country has been grappling with chronic food shortages for years, but a combination of factors, including international sanctions, natural disasters, and government mismanagement, have pushed the country to the brink of famine. Imagine a country where information is tightly controlled and access to the outside world is severely restricted. The situation is especially dire in rural areas where malnutrition is widespread and access to basic healthcare is limited. It's a humanitarian crisis that the world seems powerless to address. Next, we travel to Laos, a landlocked country in Southeast Asia that has often been overshadowed by its larger and more powerful neighbors. But Laos is facing its own set of challenges, and they're not to be underestimated. Imagine a country where gleaming new infrastructure projects stand in stark contrast to the poverty endured by many of its citizens. That's Laos, where Chinese investment has poured in, but often at a steep price. Laos has racked up a mountain of debt to China, and there are growing concerns about the country's ability to repay these loans. Add to that a potent cocktail of economic mismanagement, corruption, and inflation, and you've got a recipe for disaster. The Laotian kip has been plummeting in value, making it even harder for ordinary people to afford basic goods. Our journey takes us next to Afghanistan, a country that has known more than its fair share of hardship. After decades of conflict, the Taliban's return to power in 2021 sent shockwaves around the world. Imagine a country where the hard-won gains of 2 decades are erased virtually overnight. That's the grim reality in Afghanistan, where the Taliban's return has plunged the country into chaos and uncertainty. The international community responded to the Taliban's takeover by freezing Afghan assets and imposing crippling sanctions. While perhaps well-intentioned, these measures have had a devastating impact on the Afghan economy. The Afghan people are now facing a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. Our next stop takes us to Bangladesh, a country that has made remarkable progress in recent decades, but now finds itself teetering on the edge of economic turmoil. Imagine a country where rising sea levels threaten to displace millions, and where the garment industry that once fueled its growth is now facing an uncertain future. That's Bangladesh, a nation grappling with the complex challenges of climate change, economic vulnerability, and political instability. Bangladesh has long been hailed as a development success story, but its remarkable economic gains are now under threat. Soaring inflation, fueled by rising global food and energy prices, is hitting the poor the hardest. The country is facing a growing debt crisis, and there are concerns about its ability to service its external debt. Chapter 8. Lebanon, the Paris of the Middle East in ruins. Our journey takes us next to Lebanon, a country once known as the Paris of the Middle East, but now, a shadow of its former self. Years of corruption, economic mismanagement, and political instability have culminated in a catastrophe of epic proportions. Imagine a country where the currency has lost most of its value, where people queue for hours for basic necessities, and where the government seems powerless to stop the downward spiral. That's Lebanon today, a nation in the throes of a meltdown. The Lebanese pound has gone into free fall, wiping out the savings of countless families. Hyperinflation has become the norm, making everyday goods and services unaffordable for many. Chapter 9. Syria, a decade of devastation. Our penultimate stop takes us to Syria, a country ravaged by more than a decade of brutal civil war. The conflict has left an indelible scar on the nation, reducing once vibrant cities to rubble and displacing millions of people. Imagine a country where the horrors of war have become unbearably commonplace, where hospitals are bombed, and civilians are targeted with impunity. That's the grim reality in Syria, a nation teetering on the brink of collapse. The Syrian economy has been decimated by the conflict, with infrastructure destroyed, industries shattered, and agricultural production crippled. Basic necessities like food, water, and medicine are in short supply, and the humanitarian crisis deepens with each passing day. Chapter 10. Yemen, the Forgotten War, the Unfolding Catastrophe. Our final stop takes us to Yemen, a country gripped by what the United Nations has called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Years of conflict, fueled by regional rivalries and international indifference, have pushed Yemen to the brink. Imagine a country where children are starving to death, where hospitals are bombed, and where millions are on the verge of famine. That's Yemen, a nation trapped in a cycle of violence and despair. The conflict in Yemen has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The healthcare system has collapsed, and outbreaks of preventable diseases are rampant. The country is heavily reliant on imports, but a blockade imposed by the Saudi-led coalition has made it nearly impossible to get essential goods into the country. Out for the road ahead, a call to action. So, there you have it. 10 countries in Asia, each facing an array of challenges that threaten their very existence. It's a bleak picture, no doubt, but it's not a hopeless one. The first step towards change is awareness. We need to understand the root causes of these crises, the human toll they're taking, and the ripple effects that will be felt far beyond these nations' borders. Ignorance, as they say, is not bliss. It's a death sentence for empathy and ultimately for effective action. These are complex, deeply ingrained issues with no quick fixes, but that doesn't mean we throw up our hands and say, well, that's just the way it is. We need to demand better from our leaders, push for responsible governance, sustainable economic policies, and a commitment to human rights. Stay informed and engaged by subscribing to the Globe Bit YouTube channel. We'll continue to bring you in-depth analyses and updates on these critical issues.